Hi, everyone. I am Siobhan Neilland, and I created this program called LEAP. LEAP stands for Leadership Engagement and Advancement Program. And I'm going to give you a little hybrid portion. Some of you are candidates who've already come to this class, and some of you are Amazonians who haven't even seen this class in action yet. So it's this usually an hour, 60-minute class that I talk to external leaders or individual senior talent globally. Right now we have classes through 6 a week that we speak to globally and give them coaching on how to be better advocates for themselves, how to interview through the lens of leadership principles. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. My name, clearly we've said my name a few times now. I've been at Amazon 11 years, 5 years as a contractor, 6.5 years as an employee. I've worked for 7 different divisions of Amazon, and I have built probably about 5 different programs, LEAP being one of them. And this particular usually is a virtual coaching lounge. This leadership interview coaching lounge is one of the offerings that I also created. And part of why I created it is I started to see that 75% of the candidates I was working with, and I predominantly only work with leader of leader, very senior talent, and I started to see that they might be listed on a top 50 list, listed as one of the top leaders in a particular area of expertise, have a book, a patent, and all of a sudden, they can't make it through our interviewing process here at Amazon, because what we do here is we really want you to show us how you do what you do that's fabulous. And that can be really different than how the rest of the market is interviewing. So a lot of people, even though they were exactly the kinds of people we wanted to hire, they weren't making it through the interview process. So I thought, well, I can't seem to do my job. I got to figure out a way to get my job done. And so I created this. So this class is really a coaching class. It's a coaching class on interviewing, on how to best advocate for yourself, and also understand that we're not just asking you what companies you worked for. We want you to tell us how you did what you did through the lens of the leadership principles. Most people are memorizing the leadership principles, and that's really not going to help you in the interviewing process with us. What we want to see is how you show us how you work through the leadership principles and how you embody them, and how you advocate for yourself. And then some of us have imposter syndrome, or we self-select ourselves unintentionally because we're atrophied on our interviewing skills. And so we're going to coach you through a little bit about what are some of those skills that we can give you. Now think about it. Most of us will upskill our technical skills, our leadership skills, but most of us won't upskill our interviewing skills. And just something we completely forget about. So this is what this class is predominantly. And then if you are in the candidate side of this place, you probably are working with anywhere from 2 to 5 recruiters. You've got a front-end recruiter who reached out to you. You possibly have 2 of those. You've got a recruiting coordinator who's scheduled you for your phone interviews or your on-site. You've got a client lead recruiter that you're working with. So it can get really confusing. And sometimes we kind of forget that. We do this team recruiting thing here, so just giving you some of these insights about what the overall process of all of Amazon and AWS is. And then now what you can use is these tools to then partner with your recruiters about how that specific team interviews, either technically or for leadership roles. Those nuances, now you can really partner with your recruiters so you can understand the bigger picture. And that's all this is really just a coaching class and a way for you to advocate and really partner with your recruiters. These recruiters are here to help you get through the process. And those of you who are leaders at Amazon who are also watching this is for you to understand how you can partner with your recruiters and your candidates to help them understand. We can forget sometimes how intricate our interviewing process is. And it is one of the most complex interviewing processes I've ever worked with in my 20-year career. So why did I create this? So these case studies, if you fall into one of these categories, we can have blind spots. We don't realize it. So I do this for a living. I coach people all day long. I can tell you exactly what you need to do, but I'm not telling my story. So if you haven't interviewed in a long time, if you haven't interviewed in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, your interviewing skills are probably atrophied. You probably forgot the stories about how to talk about yourself and how you can do what you do in the way you do it, right? You might not forget those details. We're always usually looking forward in most of our cultures of how in the business culture. We're not thinking about and taking the data of what did we do, what did we accomplish, and how would we frame that through the lens of the leadership principles. So if you haven't interviewed in a long time, you're really going to have to brush up on that. You're going to build your stories. And we're going to give a homework assignment on how we do that. And candidates who've been promoted a lot, these are usually top performers. You've probably been at the same company a lot. You walk into a room, everybody's like, oh yeah, so-and-so, they can do that technical thing. We should have them do it, or that leader, we should have them build this leadership team. They follow leaders to another company or within the company. These people are the worst at interviewing. And part of why they're the worst at interviewing is they're so good at looking at the problem solving. They're a top performer. They're just on to the next thing. Think about it. How many of us, we see a problem, we know exactly what to do. It's like automatic pilot. Those people tend to be the worst at interviewing. And they're actually exactly who we want to hire. So this is why I built this class, is I started to see that the top performers were actually the ones who weren't interviewing well, and I wanted to give you the tools that you needed to do that. So think about it. If you fall into that category, this could be a blind spot for you. You're going to need to do some mock interviewing. Go talk to your old coworkers, your old boss, those people that when you walked into a room, everybody knew the body of your work. You're used to that. So now go help them help you build your stories. And then the other part is, if you haven't interviewed in a long time, you're just going to be atrophied. And it's human nature to go, oh, I'm not sure I'm technical enough. I'm not sure I'm a strong enough leader. I'm not sure I'm this. I'm not sure I'm not. It's just human nature that we tend to self-select ourselves out of the process. Or you got good old-fashioned imposter syndrome. Like, I thought I was doing you a favor if you were my manager that I'm interviewing for a job, and I would tell you the top 2 things that I think I wouldn't do very well. Now, I might do all the things for that job out of 10, but I can only do 2 that I can't do, and I'm going to tell you those first. And since probably 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes on it, I've just told you I'm not a fit for the role. I didn't even realize this was a blind spot for me that I had. Now, most of us have that, and we don't realize that we have that. So these are those kinds of things where you need to create an interview strategy for yourself about how you lead, you build your stories, you lead with your data, you lead with content, and you really build your story so you know your story in your bones so you can just rattle it off. Some other things is interviewing in Amazon and AWS is a little different. We fit our job families a little differently. You might have part technical and non-technical in your background, and you're really kind of confused about what in your background you are being interviewed for. Talk to your recruiters. They're your partners. Talk to those phone screeners. Ask them, what is in my background do you think is a fit for this type of role? There's a couple people who've been hired through our Leap process that really had to go through 3 or 4 different interviews before we found the right role for them. Not because they weren't amazing. They're amazing leaders here, but we didn't find the right role for them. This is part of where you have to be an advocate for yourself and you have to ask questions. Here's a story of a woman that I hired, and we almost didn't hire her. She's an amazing director here at AWS, and she came to me by another recruiter. A recruiter gave her to me and said, well, I was trying to hire her for a technical leadership role, but she says she's not technical enough, and she says she doesn't lead large enough teams. So I was like, okay, well, let me talk to her. So I talked to her. I dived a little bit deeper. Of course, she turns out she's a very strong leader. She's led teams as large as 10 to 20 leaders, with teams as large as 200. She also is still very technical. Even though she started her career in software development, she had a software development degree as a software engineer, she got tapped and moved into non-technical roles in a leadership role. And so she thought she wasn't technical enough or led large enough teams to be at AWS. She made that assumption for herself. Turns out she built an app in AWS in her spare time for a nonprofit that rolled out to 1 million users. And this skill set and all these extra certifications that she did actually helped her still keep all her technical skill sets. So she basically hit all these categories, right? She hadn't interviewed in a long time. She'd been at the same company for most of her career. She'd been promoted for almost all her roles. She was self-selecting herself out of the interviewing process. Once I showed this to her and I gave her the homework assignment that I'm about to go over, which turns out was really fascinating, she was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I was doing this. I mentor so many people, and this is a blind spot for me. So we coached her, gave her the homework. Turns out she came and knocked it out of the park, and she's now a director doing amazing things. But I love to tell her story because, again, it wasn't that she wasn't an amazing leader. It was that she hadn't interviewed in 10 years. She didn't have that language for herself, and she had this blind spot for herself. So this is where we have to create an interview strategy for ourselves, just like we would when we're talking to our customer, right? We want to have an interview strategy. Our interviewers don't understand who we are. We have to show them who we are. We can't just assume they know. And most of us don't do great on our resumes, right? Our resumes kind of look like this. We need to show our interviewers what these touch points are. What are these greatest hits? Some other things is you want to come to the interview with your full personality. We wouldn't go to a customer and say, sure, we got a product. Good luck with that. We would say, hi, customer, what problems are you trying to solve? And then we would start asking and engaging questions with our customers. Well, you want to do the same thing with your interviewer. You want to ask engaging questions. What is it about this role? What do you want to know? Oh, this is what you want? Okay. You want to have really understand what they want to know so you can help them understand your career journey along the process. And remember, as humans, we encounter 11 million pieces of information at any given second, and we can only process 40 or 50 of those. So if you spend 20, 30 minutes telling your interviewer you're not a fit for a role, how are they not going to take you at your word? You just told them you're not a fit for the role. And again, you might not be a perfect fit for the role, but you told them you weren't, right? You have to show them how you are fit. It's such simple common sense. And when I realized that, it took me like 20 years of my career to realize this. I couldn't believe it. I was like blind to this with such a simple concept. So anyway, this is how you can help become an advocate for yourself in the interviewing process and help your interviewers and treat them like customers. And you're going to have, one, not a fearful experience. You're going to have a much more engaging experience, just like you would with your customers, and trying to solve the problem of helping them understand your career journey. And then, now, some of us don't really always know what imposter syndrome is. I just did a listen to another talk recently, and I realized there's 6 different kinds of imposter syndrome. I'm not going to go into all of that, but what's fascinating is like it's so many blind spots. Perfectionism can be an imposter syndrome. Just like that woman I told you, she thought she wasn't good enough for AWS. It wasn't she wasn't good enough. She just had an assumption of being what perfection looked like, and so she did that. So only research I can really find is based on gender, so I'll talk about that. But they say that globally, most men who will apply for a role and meet 60% and qualify for the role, they'll talk about that 60%. Whereas globally, most women will only apply if they meet 100% of the criteria. And let's say they meet 80%, like I did, and they talk about that. They'll only talk about the 20% they're not a fit. Now, again, this is a gender example, but what's interesting is I have found this in different cultures, regions, geographies. There's a lot of cultures where it's culturally taboo to boast about yourself or talk about yourself in certain ways compared to, like I did a senior VP search in Singapore, and it was considered taboo for both men and women to talk in the way that we were sort of expecting them, and this was a San Francisco-based company where we were sort of expecting you to be boastful. So these cultural classes, again, this is where you want to sort of think of a lens of how do you advocate for yourself and think about where are those blind spots for yourself and create an interview strategy based on that. Now, diversity. We all hear about diversity. But diversity, think about it. All of you, both Amazonians and those who are interested in becoming Amazonians, you all probably have spent most of your career focused in a certain area of expertise. You're probably so niche and figured that out. You're just in the zone about it. But think about all the other intersectional areas of your life that influence that decision, that influence the daily decisions that you do to make you do what you do and do it well. And that's where we kind of want to think of, as you start to build your stories, who are you? What makes you good at what you do? How do you influence what you do? Because at the end of the day, what we are trying to do at Amazon was we were trying to hire smart problem solvers who can solve problems on a global scale that haven't been solved before. And we want you to come do that, and you're going to come do that in whatever intersectional areas that you have that haven't maybe been explored before globally. So where's mine? Outside of Amazon, for 16 years, I've been the CEO and founder of an organization that helps impoverished women have babies safely in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a birthing center, medical center, economic sustainability. Most of my Amazonians are looking at like they don't even know I do this. I do that because I'm extremely passionate about creating advocacy and empowering people to give them the tools and the resources they need to find and have access to what's good for them. Well, what's cool is Amazon's cool enough to let me take the intersectionality of my skill set in my personal life and bring that skill set into recruiting. And I now created a program that honestly, I don't know how it's scaled globally because they gave me I had the idea and they're like, sure. And I just went and did it, right? So now we have 2,000 people who come through these classes a month globally. And it's the intersectionality of, I really am passionate about making people find tools and resources that will help them empower themselves in whatever way they need for the betterment of their life. What's yours? In your stories, bring your full personality. There's something that you do that is so unique to you in how you do it in your job skill set. Make sure you talk about that. Bring your full self. That's how I think of diversity and all the other cultural pieces that come along with that. Now, here's where we start to begin the homework assignment, and make sure I'm on point. Make sure, sometimes I'm always fascinated with people who've been in their careers a long time. You maybe have don't know, you can't really rattle off your stats. Know how long you've been in your career. Know how long you've been a manager. Know how long you've been a manager of managers. Know how long, know how if you've been national, regional, global. You should be able to put, and this should be a 2 or 3 minute sentence. If somebody says, tell me a little bit about yourself, most Amazonians in the interviews are not going to ask that, but some do. And you need to help guide that interviewer to give them a framework of who you are, especially if you want to be a manager. If you want to be a people manager, you need to show your span of control that you're a manager. And if you're just like, oh yeah, who was that? How many people did I manage? Was that regional? I can't. You want to be able to say it in 2 or 3 sentences. And if you've done really cool projects you've launched, be able to rattle that off in a couple sentences. Did you bring a product to market? Did you do a go-to-market strategy? Did you go to sales club? Do you have a patent? What are some of these cool things you're really proud of? Make sure you've got some good talking points about that, not long, clear, concise. And if you have a side project where you built an app on AWS to 1 million users, you might want to talk about it because it'll probably help you get a job. Here is probably the homework assignment that most of you, and I only have a couple more slides. And again, this is sort of a hybrid version of this class. We usually do this in an hour. What we suggest for our homework assignment for those of you who are interviewing with us is that all of your interviewers and your recruiters are going to tell you, go learn those leadership principles. And what most people do is they go memorize leadership principles, and you look at them and you're like, oh yeah, I'm totally customer obsessed. Oh yeah, I totally have ownership. But what's hard about that is that's not telling your story through the lens of the leadership principles. We all if you're going to interview here, you probably resonate with the leadership principles. We have 16 leadership principles, and my suggestion for your homework is build 2 stories for each leadership principle of how you solved a business problem and how you solved a functional problem or technical problem in your area of expertise. And your area of expertise is whatever you're interviewing for, whatever you feel like is your highlight, or what the job description. And you can look at that job description, those minimum requirements and the roles and responsibilities, and that'll give you an idea about probably the functional questions they're going to ask. This will give you 2 full stories for each leadership principle. So because you have to have unique stories for all your interviewers. Again, a unique thing to Amazon interviewing. So one of my suggestions is you need to have like at least 20, 28, 32 unique stories, and all need to have at least 2 to 5 leadership principles in them. So what's important is that the stories are unique, and you could have all 16 leadership principles in each of the stories if you really wanted to, but you probably won't. But at least have 2 to 5. Like I probably have ownership and bias for action in every one of my stories because I'm just built that way. Even when I shouldn't have ownership, I have it. It's probably to a detriment at times, right? So some of you are going to have multiple leadership principles, and others you may not have in all your stories. And then make sure you're fleshing out methodologies, processes, mechanisms, because one of the other unique things about interviewing here is we want you to show us how you did what you did. How did you build the plane? What is the methodologies, the processes, the mechanisms, the cool stuff? What did you grow revenue 20% year over year? What are the things that you utilize to do that? And once you've fleshed out almost like a mind map each of these stories, now everybody's expecting you to answer in the STAR method. And you probably got tons of information about the STAR method. The STAR method is the situation, task, action, results. So what were those customers? What was that time? What was your role? Who were you? Who were you working with? And then think about most innovation comes from a crisis, right? This class started because I couldn't get people hired, right? I had to go do research about why it wasn't working. So if there's a bug in the software, you have to go do the research. What is that? So what are the tasks that you had to do to figure out why something's working or what the situation was? And then what were those actions that you implemented? And how long did it take? And who was helping you? And who did this and who did that? What did you do? What did the team do? And then what were those final results? The results are not only what impacted this particular, let's say, customer, but what impacted the team, what impacted the company, what impacted future customers. Thinking about these, again, we want to solve large problems on a global scale. We want you to tell that. And we want a nice arc in that STAR method. And most of you who come to the Virtual Coaching Lounge, we have video links of all of our leaders talking at places like reInvent, who will usually tell a customer story. And they almost all tell that customer story a little bit in that STAR method. So that'll give you a range of sort of seeing how you can tell the story that way. And again, remember, if you've come to any of our classes, you're not interviewing against other candidates, which is another unique thing about interviewing here. You're interviewing against what we call the bar of Amazon. And above bar, you want to make sure if you were giving an example of something you did that was bias for action, you would want to make sure you navigated quickly, even though you couldn't find all the gaps. You make sure you communicated to your customers, you communicated to your teammate, you understood when to communicate and when not to, and you were willing to make small progress even if it wasn't perfect. Where a below bar is you were scared of making it, you didn't tell the customer, you didn't tell the teammates, and you maybe didn't keep the project going. That doesn't show a nice arc of that STAR method, right? So those are the examples of how we want to do, building out your stories to the lens of leadership principles. And 75% usually of a lot of, whether even technical roles, some technical questions are even framed in behavioral. So be prepared that even some of your technical examples are going to come through the lens of those leadership principles. So people think, well, what portion is technical and what portion is leadership? It's all leadership, and we expect everybody, no matter what level or role, whether individual contributor or leader, to showcase how they would live and breathe through the leadership principles, and then also then you add those functional pieces too. Now, most of your on-sites are going to be once you get past your phone interviews, usually 1 or 2 phone interviews, you're going to be qualified for what's called an on-site interview. Since the pandemic, 99% of all on-sites are virtual, but still work with your recruiters. That could change soon. And then all of those interviewers are going to get assigned 2 leadership principle questions, which each leadership principle questions has questions assigned to them, and they'll usually have a functional or technical related question that's aligned to that. Now, some will only have 2 questions, some will have 3, some will have 4, but it's important to just remember that most of your interviewers are going to be calibrating you both for leadership principles and functional fit. So they're going to come to you and ask 3 or 4 questions. That means you really have to have unique answers to each of those. And they're all going to go back to what's called a debrief. And in that debrief, they're going to all take those 3 or 4 answers you gave them, and they're going to go around a circle, and they're going to say, do we move forward with an on-site or not? And you'll know within 5 days. So it's we have a whole systematic thing. We make sure that none of the leadership principle questions are duplicated. We make sure none of the functional questions are duplicated. So partner with your recruiters. They're going to know more about the specifics of your team you're interviewing for. But these are some things to think about. Now, most of the interviews are 45 to 60 minutes, but work with your recruiters to determine what that team does. Every team globally does it a little bit differently. But you really only have 10 to 12 minutes per per story. So they're going to say, tell me about a time you did such and such. They're going to ask a leadership question or a behavioral question. And you have 3 to 5 minutes to probably answer in that STAR method. And then they're going to say, oh, well, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. Then they ask another 5 to 7 questions deep usually. And then that's about 10 to 12 minutes you have. That's not very much time. Think about how much time I've been talking already. And there's just really not enough time. So you really have to have your STAR method into that 3-minute pitch. Really dive deep and concise. And then you also have to make sure that all those questions get answered so they can go back to that debrief and vote for an on-site for you, right? And those last 5 minutes, ask questions about the org, the company, the team, what is important. Or ask questions. Did this interviewer get all their questions answered so they can go back to that debrief? Because if they don't get all those questions answered that they need to have answered, they won't be able to move forward with a final offer. And some other things. All your interviews, think about them in the STAR map. You don't have to say situation, task, action, results, but you need to be used to that rhythm. Make sure everything's data-backed. I have a very qualitative program. It's very hard to put data on the work that I do. But I have hundreds and hundreds of quotes that you all saw on the screen of candidates. And I've averaged about a 30% on-site to offer ratio for the candidates who come through our virtual coaching lounge. So use data, even for qualitative things, and think about it. You have to just step out a little bit. And don't use anything confidential, but just use things where you can use a range. Make sure you have different stories for all your interviewers, because they will, especially all those on-site interviewers, they're going to compare notes in that debrief. They're going to go around and see if you say the same story. This shows that you have multiple examples of how you showcase what you do and how you do it fabulously. Adversity, think about it. I think almost everything I've ever created or invented, or every startup I've started, all comes from a mess, a mistake, some sort of adversity, some huge problem. Think about that. So make sure you've got some adversity stories. Innovation usually comes from that. And try to keep your stories, work relevant. But if you've got a cool story, like the woman who built an app on AWS in her spare time, those are some stories you want to make sure you're adding. Or if you're building robots on your side and that helps with your day job. Make sure as language you use you. What do you do and what did the team do? And keep things, a lot of your interviewers and your recruiters are going to tell you keep the last 5 years. Use your better judgment. If you're interviewing for a role that you that you haven't done in 10 years, but it's very similar to what you did 10 years ago, then you're probably going to use some of those stories. So just use your better judgment. Ask your recruiters, what in your background are they interested in utilizing for this role that you're interviewing for? Keep your stories. Also, don't try to guess what leadership principle. Nobody knows. They all sound the same. They all sound, tell me about a time. So what's more important is you know your stories in your bones. Just know your story. Be able to rattle your story off. I have to say, this exercise of doing this homework has made me a better leader. It's made me better with my customers. And it made me frame things in a simpler way to understand how to communicate, not only when I'm interviewing, but also to do my job better. Stay hydrated. Like right now, I actually should be drinking some water. Snacks are available. Low blood sugar and dehydration, and those things can really make a difference. Also, don't just power through an interview when you got to go to the bathroom or a bio break. Ask for it, right? Ask for yourself. Advocate for yourself, and make sure you partner with your recruiters. Ask them what about your background is what's influencing this interview. And if you have any sort of disability or you need assistance, we have global accessibility resources, but you gotta ask. We want to be here, we want to support you. And then everybody always asks, can you have notes? You can totally have notes, but stay engaged. Again, treat your interviewers like a customer. You want to stay on contact. You don't want to be looking like you're Googling something. You want to make sure that you're staying focused. And then if you really have to take notes, again, treat your interviewer like a customer. Make sure you ask questions. Hey, do you mind if I write some notes? I want to actually figure this out or whiteboard this. That's fine. Again, partner with your interviewers. This is really key and critical, and it shows how you are participating in the Amazonian process. So we're not going to really have much time for questions, but I will be in the networking area so we can ask some questions, answer questions. But I just want to thank you all for taking the time. I know some of you have seen this before, but thank you very much for taking the time to be here with us today.